The wind howled through the skeletal trees of the iron hills, carrying with it the scent of smoke and blood. The year was 1387, and the once prosperous kingdom of Valtoria had been reduced to a fractured land of scorched fields and crumbling keeps. For over 2 decades, the noble houses of Creighton and Dainhart had waged a bitter war, their feud fueled by old grudges and fresh betrayals. The common folk suffered most, starving, terrified, and caught between the ambitions of ruthless lords. But in the shadows of this conflict moved a man whose name was spoken only in whispers. The Black Wolf. A mercenary without a past, a killer without a master. He sold his blade to the highest bidder, and his reputation was such that even seasoned knights tightened their grips on their swords at the mention of him. Some said he was a ghost, others a demon, but Damon Cross was neither. He was a man who had long since buried his conscience beneath layers of blood and steel. And tonight, he had a contract to fulfill. The night was cold, the kind of cold that seeped into bones and made men question their choices. A thin layer of frost crunched underfoot as the figure moved silently through the forest, his breath curling in pale wisps before vanishing into the dark. He was a shadow among shadows, a wraith clad in black leather and wool, his presence as silent as the grave. They called him the Black Wolf, though few lived long enough to speak the name to his face. Damon Cross had been many things in his life: orphan, soldier, mercenary, but above all he was a killer. Not the kind who took pleasure in bloodshed, but the kind who understood it as a necessity, a language as old as time itself. He had no loyalties, no allegiances beyond the weight of coin in his palm. That was how he preferred it. Loyalty was a weakness, and weakness got men killed. Tonight, his path led him to the edge of the Dainhart estate, a sprawling fortress of stone and timber nestled in the heart of the valley. The contract had been simple: Lord Edric Dainhart must die before the next moon. A straightforward task for a man of Damon's skills. But something about this job unsettled him. The woods were too quiet, the estate too lightly guarded. It felt like a trap. Still, the Black Wolf did not turn from a hunt. He slipped past the outer guards with ease, his movements fluid, his dagger already loose in its sheath. The courtyard lay ahead, bathed in silver moonlight. And there, standing alone amidst the frost-kissed stones, was a woman. Lady Valeria Dainhart. He had heard of her, of course. The sharp-tongued daughter of Lord Edric, a woman who rode like a knight and spoke like a scholar. The nobles called her willful. The servants called her kind. Damon had expected arrogance, the haughty bearing of a noblewoman who had never known hardship. But the woman before him stood with her arms wrapped around herself, her breath fogging the air as she stared up at the stars. There was no pride in her posture, only weariness. For a moment, he hesitated. Then the arrow came. It struck the tree beside his head with a thud, close enough that the fletching grazed his cheek. Damon dropped into a crouch, his dagger already in hand as figures emerged from the darkness. Not Dainhart men, but soldiers bearing the crest of House Creighton. The Black Wolf had been betrayed. The fight was brutal and swift. Damon moved like a storm, his blade cutting through the night with lethal precision. But the numbers were against him. A sword sliced across his ribs, another found his thigh. Blood warmed his skin as he staggered, his vision blurring at the edges. Then, like a stroke of fate, her voice cut through the chaos. Enough. Lady Valeria stood at the top of the courtyard steps, a crossbow leveled at the Creighton captain. Her green eyes burned with a fire that had nothing to do with fear. "This man is under my protection," she said, her voice steady. "Leave now, or answer to my father's wrath." The soldiers hesitated. Killing a noblewoman was no small thing, even for House Creighton. With a muttered curse, their captain signaled the retreat. Damon's knees hit the ground as the world tilted. The last thing he saw before darkness took him was Valeria's face, her expression unreadable as she watched him fall. When he woke, it was to the scent of herbs and the crackle of a fire. The room was small but warm, the bed beneath him softer than any he had known in years. His wounds had been cleaned and bandaged, his weapons laid out on a nearby table, within reach but untouched. "You're awake." Valeria sat in a chair by the hearth, a book open in her lap. She didn't look up as she spoke. Damon's voice was rough. "Why save me?" "Because I want to know who sent you." He laughed, though it pulled at his injuries. "Even if I knew, I wouldn't tell you." She finally lifted her gaze, and for the first time, he saw the steel beneath her noble bearing. "Then you'll rot in my dungeons." But Damon had spent enough years reading men and women to see the truth. She wasn't just angry, she was curious. And curiosity was a far more dangerous thing. Days passed in a tense dance of silence and sharp words. Damon learned that the contract had been a ruse, a ploy by Lord Creighton to frame him for Lord Dainhart's murder and justify open war. Valeria had known. She had been waiting for him. "You used me," he growled one evening as she changed his bandages. Her hands didn't falter. "And you came to kill my father. We're neither of us innocent." There was no apology in her voice, no regret. Only fact. It should have angered him. Instead, he found himself watching her, the way her brow furrowed when she read, the way she spoke to the servants with a respect few nobles bothered to show. She was a puzzle, this lady with a warrior's mind and a queen's pride. And when the news came that Creighton's forces were marching on the Dainhart lands, it was Valeria who came to him with an offer. "Fight for me," she said. "Help me end this war." Damon should have refused. He had no stake in this fight, no reason to care which lord ruled these lands. But the memory of her standing between him and death lingered, as did the unspoken truth. He had been ready to die that night, and she had given him a reason not to. "What's in it for me?" he asked, though they both knew the answer. Valeria's lips curved, just slightly. Redemption. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Damon felt something stir in his chest. Something dangerously like hope. The fire crackled between them, casting flickering shadows across Valeria's face as she waited for his answer. Damon studied her, the stubborn set of her jaw, the way her fingers tapped impatiently against the arm of her chair. She wasn't used to waiting, this noblewoman. Not used to being denied. "Redemption," he repeated, rolling the word around his mouth like a foreign wine. It tasted strange. "You think a man like me can be redeemed?" Valeria leaned forward, the firelight catching in her dark hair. "I think every man deserves the chance to try." Damon barked a laugh that turned into a wince as pain lanced through his ribs. Spoken like someone who's never had to look a man in the eyes as you slit his throat. "Perhaps not," she admitted. "But I've watched my people starve while nobles play at war. I've buried children who should have lived to see spring." Her voice hardened. "If you want to wallow in your sins, do it elsewhere. But if you're tired of being a weapon with no will of your own, then fight with me." The challenge in her words pricked at him. Damon had spent years building his reputation as the Black Wolf, a man without allegiances, without weakness. Yet here was this noble woman, barely more than a girl, seeing through him as if he were made of glass. "And if I say no?" he asked, more to test her than anything. Valeria shrugged. "Then you walk away. Your wounds are nearly healed. I won't stop you." Damon's eyebrows rose. "You let me go, knowing what I am." "I know exactly what you are," she said, standing and brushing non-existent dust from her skirts. "A man who's spent too long believing the worst of himself. The gates are unguarded. Leave if you wish." She turned to go, but Damon's voice stopped her. "Wait." Valeria paused, not turning around. What exactly would fighting for you entail? When she faced him again, there was no triumph in her expression, only calculation. "Training my men. Teaching them how to move unseen, how to strike where it hurts most. House Creighton plays dirty. We need to be dirtier." Damon snorted. "You want me to turn your farmers into assassins?" "I want you to help them survive," she corrected. "Will you do it?" The smart thing would be to walk away, to disappear into the night as he'd done countless times before. But something, whether it was the fire in Valeria's eyes or the weight of his own exhaustion, made him nod. "For now," he said, "but I make no promises." Valeria's smile was small but genuine. "That's all I ask." As she left, Damon stared into the flames, wondering what devil had possessed him to agree. He'd spent a lifetime avoiding entanglements, yet here he was, pledging himself to a noblewoman's cause. It was madness, but for the first time in longer than he could remember, the hollow place inside him didn't ache quite so badly. Outside, the wind howled through the castle stones, carrying with it the promise of coming war. And for once, Damon Cross, the feared Black Wolf, found himself looking forward to the dawn. The training yard stank of sweat and damp wool as Damon surveyed the dozen men assembled before him. Farmers' hands clutching spears too heavy for them, blacksmiths wearing ill-fitting mail. This was what passed for House Dainhart's militia. The youngest couldn't have seen more than 16 winters, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously as Damon's gaze passed over him. "You're all going to die." The words hung in the crisp morning air. Several men shifted uncomfortably. One spat in the dirt. Damon unsheathed his dagger, watching sunlight dance along the blade. "Creighton's men have been killing since before some of you were pissing straight. They know how to get a man before he knows he's dead." He pointed the dagger at a burly miller with arms like tree trunks. "You, come at me." The big man hesitated, then lumbered forward with a roar, Swinging a wooden practice sword in a wide arc, Damon sidestepped, hooked a foot behind the miller's ankle, and sent him crashing face first into the mud. Dead, Damon announced to the group. He turned to the next man. You. Try. One by one, they came at him. One by one, they ended up in the dirt. The last was the boy, his hands shaking on his spear. What should I do? The youth stammered. Damon sheathed his dagger. Run. A murmur ran through the men. The boy's face flushed. I won't be a coward. You'll be a corpse if you stand and fight like these fools, Damon said. He grabbed the boy's shoulder, turning him to face the others. First lesson of war. Only fight when you can win. Otherwise, survive. He met each man's eyes in turn. I won't teach you to be heroes. I'll teach you to go home to your families when this is over. A silence fell over the yard. Then, from the arched gateway, came slow, measured applause. Lady Valeria leaned against the stone arch, her riding leathers dusted with snow. Well said, Wolf. She pushed off the wall and strode forward, the men parting before her like wheat before the scythe. Though I wonder, does this philosophy apply to you as well? Damon felt the weight of her gaze like a physical touch. I don't have a family to go home to. Pity, she murmured, just for his ears, before addressing the men. My lords, you've met your instructor. Listen well, his lessons may be the difference between life and death when Creighton comes. As the men dispersed, Valeria fell into step beside Damon. You were too hard on them. They'll thank me when they're not bleeding out in some field. She shot him an appraising look. You care about them. I care about not wasting my time, he grumbled, though the heat in his cheeks betrayed him. Valeria smiled, but said nothing. They walked in silence past the armory, where the rhythmic clang of steel on steel echoed through the open doors. The scent of molten metal and charcoal filled the air. Walk with me to the eastern wall, Valeria said suddenly. There's something you should see. The climb up the narrow stairway left Damon's healing ribs protesting. At the top, the wind whipped at their cloaks as they gazed eastward. Beyond the castle walls, the land sloped down to a valley dotted with thatched roofs and plumes of chimney smoke. My people, Valeria said softly. Every one of those homes will burn if we fail. Damon studied the village, then the terrain surrounding it. Your walls are strong, but Creighton will siege engines by week's end. You don't have the men to hold them. Then we don't let them reach the walls. Valeria turned to him, her eyes alight with a fierceness that made Damon's breath catch. Teach my men to strike from the shadows, as you do. Harass their supply lines. Poison their wells. Make every step toward my home cost them dearly. For the first time, Damon saw past the noblewoman to the strategist beneath. You're asking for a dirty war. I'm asking to survive, she corrected. Will you help me? The wind tugged at Valeria's hair, loosening strands from her braid to dance about her face. In that moment, she looked less like a lady and more like some ancient warrior queen, standing defiant against the storm. Damon found himself nodding. We'll need to start with scouts, men who know the land. I have just the ones, Valeria said, her smile sharp as a blade. Meet me in the map room after supper. We've much to plan. As she turned to go, Damon caught her wrist without thinking. Why me? The question had burned in him since he'd woken in her care. You could have ransomed me, executed me. Why trust me with this? Valeria didn't pull away, because when I looked into your eyes that night in the courtyard, I didn't see a killer. I saw a man who'd forgotten he could be more. She gently freed her wrist. Don't prove me wrong, Wolf. Damon watched her descend the stairs, her words echoing in his chest. For years, he'd worn the mantle of the black wolf like armor, letting it define him. Now this noblewoman dared suggest he could be something else. The wind shifted, carrying with it the distant sound of children laughing in the village below. Damon exhaled slowly, watching his breath mist in the cold air. Perhaps, he thought, it was time to find out. The first snows came early that year, blanketing the Dainhart lands in a hush of white. Damon stood at the edge of the training yard, watching his breath curl in the frigid air as the recruits moved through their drills. They were better now, quicker, quieter, less likely to trip over their own feet in the dark. But better wasn't good enough. Not against what was coming. The boy Joran, he'd learned his name was, stumbled as he practiced his footwork, his boots slipping on the icy ground. Damon caught him by the scruff of his tunic before he could fall. Eyes up, Damon growled. The ground won't kill you. The man in front of you will. Joran swallowed hard and nodded, his fingers tightening around the hilt of his practiced dagger. He was young, too young, but he had a fire in him that reminded Damon of himself at that age. Before the wars, before the blood, before he'd learned how easily a man could break. A shout echoed from the gatehouse, pulling Damon's attention away. One of the scouts had returned, his horse lathered and heaving as he slid from the saddle. Damon didn't wait for the man to catch his breath before striding forward. "What did you see?" The scout's face was grim. "Creighton's forces. They're moving through the Blackwood. 3 days, maybe 4, and they'll be at our gates." Damon's jaw tightened. They'd known this was coming, but hearing it confirmed sent a ripple of unease through the yard. The men had stopped their drills, their faces turned toward him, waiting. He didn't give them time to dwell on it. "Then we don't wait for them to come to us." Valeria's map room was a small, windowless chamber tucked deep within the keep, its walls lined with shelves of yellowed scrolls and parchment. A single lantern cast flickering light over the table where she stood, her fingers tracing the inked lines of the Blackwood. Damon didn't bother with pleasantries. "They're coming." She didn't look up. "I know." He frowned. "The scouts just returned." "How?" "My own sources." She finally lifted her gaze, and the hardness in her eyes gave him pause. "Creighton isn't just bringing soldiers. He's hired mercenaries. Sells words from the southern cities. Men who don't care about honor or borders, just coin." Damon's stomach turned. He knew the type. He'd been the type. "We can't face them head-on," he said, stepping closer to the table. "Not with the numbers we have." "Then what do you suggest?" He pointed to a narrow pass marked on the map. "Here. The Blackwood narrows before it opens into the valley. If we can funnel them through this stretch, we can pick them off before they ever reach the open ground." Valeria studied the map, her brow furrowing. "It's risky. If they realize we're there." "They won't." Damon's voice was low, certain. "Not if we do it right." She held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded. "Do it." The forest was alive with the sounds of the night, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of an owl, the creak of branches shifting in the wind. Damon moved through the trees like a shadow, the men following in his wake. They'd left the castle under cover of darkness, slipping through the postern gate, one by one to avoid drawing attention. Joran was at his side, his breathing too loud in the stillness. Damon shot him a look, and the boy clamped his mouth shut, nodding. They reached the pass just before dawn. The narrow trail wound between steep, rocky slopes, the perfect place for an ambush. Damon signaled the men into position, some high in the trees with bows, others hidden among the boulders with spears. He'd taught them how to disappear, how to strike without warning. Now they would see if they'd learned. The wait was the worst part. The cold seeped into Damon's bones, his fingers stiff around the hilt of his dagger. He could feel the tension in the men around him, the fear they tried to hide. He didn't blame them. Fear kept you sharp. Fear kept you alive. Then movement. A scout emerged from the trees, his dark cloak blending into the shadows. Damon held his breath as the man paused, scanning the trail. For a heartbeat, he thought they'd been discovered. But the scout moved on, signaling the all-clear. Moments later, the first of Creighton's men appeared. They came in a loose column, their armor glinting dully in the pale morning light. Damon counted 20-30 more, far more than they'd anticipated. His pulse quickened. This wouldn't be a skirmish. It would be a slaughter. He glanced at Joran, saw the panic in the boy's eyes. Damon shook his head once, sharply. "Wait." The mercenaries were easy to pick out, rougher, louder, their weapons mismatched, and their laughter too bright for the quiet of the woods. They walked like men who expected no resistance. Damon let the first half of the column pass. Then he raised his hand and dropped it. The forest erupted. Arrows hissed through the air, finding their marks with deadly precision. Men screamed as spears thrust from between the rocks, impaling them before they could raise their shields. Damon was moving before the first body hit the ground, his dagger flashing as he cut down a mercenary who lunged for him. Chaos swallowed the pass. Creighton's men scrambled for cover, but there was none to be found. The trees themselves seemed to come alive, the shadows reaching out to drag them down. Damon lost track of time, of thought. There was only the fight, the rhythm of strike and dodge and strike again. He barely registered the sting of a blade grazing his arm, the warmth of blood soaking into his sleeve. Then a cry. "Joran." The boy was on his knees, a mercenary standing over him with a raised sword. Damon didn't think. He threw himself forward, knocking the man aside just as the blade came down. They hit the ground together, rolling, grappling. The mercenary was bigger, stronger, but Damon had desperation on his side. He drove his dagger up beneath the man's ribs, felt the hot gush of blood over his hand. The mercenary gasped, his eyes wide with shock, then went still. Damon shoved the body aside and hauled Joran to his feet. "Are you hurt?" The boy shook his head, his face pale. I froze." Damon didn't have time to reassure him. The fight wasn't over. But when he turned, he realized it was. The pass was littered with bodies. A handful of Creighton's men had fled, their footsteps crunching through the underbrush as they disappeared into the trees. The rest were dead or dying. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, slowly, the Dainhart men emerged from their hiding places. Some were wounded, their faces tight with pain, but they were alive. All of them. Damon exhaled, his breath shuddering. They'd done it, but as he looked down at the blood on his hands, he knew this was only the beginning. Creighton wouldn't take this defeat lightly, and the next battle would be worse. The victory in the Blackwood Pass tasted like ash in Damon's mouth. He stood at the edge of the great hall, watching as Valeria's men celebrated with tankards of ale and boisterous songs. The firelight painted their faces golden, smoothing away the lingering fear in their eyes. They had survived. That was enough for them. But Damon knew better. He slipped from the hall unnoticed, the raucous laughter fading behind him as he stepped into the cold night air. The courtyard was quiet, the castle walls looming dark against the star-strewn sky. He flexed his injured arm, the wound beneath its bandages pulsing dully. "You should be celebrating with them." Valeria's voice came from the shadows near the armory. She stepped into the moonlight, her riding leathers replaced by a simple woolen dress, her hair unbound. Without her armor, she looked younger, softer. But Damon had seen the steel in her gaze. There was nothing soft about this woman. "There's nothing to celebrate," he said. "Creighton will send more men. Better prepared." Valeria moved to stand beside him, her shoulder nearly brushing his. "We bought time. That's worth something." Damon glanced at her. "Time for what?" "For this." She pulled a folded parchment from her sleeve and handed it to him. The wax seal was broken, but Damon recognized the insignia, a crowned falcon. The king's mark. His stomach tightened as he scanned the contents. "He's coming here?" Valeria nodded. "In 3 days' time. Officially, it's a progress tour of the borderlands. But my sources say he means to settle the feud between our houses once and for all." Damon crushed the parchment in his fist. "Then Creighton will make his move before then. He won't risk the king interfering. Which is why we need to be ready." Valeria turned to face him fully. "But there's something else." The hesitation in her voice put Damon on edge. "What?" "We have a traitor." The words landed like a blow. Damon's mind raced. The too easy ambush in the courtyard when he'd first arrived. The way Creighton's men had known exactly where to find them in the Blackwood. Someone had been feeding information to the enemy. "Who?" Valeria's jaw tightened. "I don't know yet, but it's someone close. Someone who has access to my plans, my movements." She met his gaze. "I need you to find them." Damon exhaled sharply. "You're asking me to spy on your own people. I'm asking you to help me save them." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Before more good men die because of my blind trust." The raw vulnerability in her words struck Damon like a physical thing. This wasn't the proud noblewoman speaking. This was the girl who had buried too many friends, who carried the weight of her people's survival on her shoulders. He found himself nodding before he'd consciously decided. "I'll do it." Valeria's shoulders relaxed slightly. "Thank you." They stood in silence for a long moment, the weight of the unspoken things between them pressing down. Finally, Valeria turned to go. "Be careful," Damon said suddenly. She paused, glancing back at him with a faint smile. "Worried about me, Wolf?" The teasing lilt in her voice shouldn't have sent heat crawling up his neck. Damon scowled. "Worried about my own neck if you get yourself killed." Valeria laughed softly, the sound curling around him like smoke. "I'll keep that in mind." Then she was gone, leaving Damon alone in the courtyard with the traitor's shadow hanging over them all. The next 2 days passed in a tense, watchful rhythm. Damon moved through the castle like a ghost, observing, listening. He noted who lingered near Valeria's chambers, who asked too many questions about the king's visit, whose eyes darted away too quickly when questioned. But the truth came from an unexpected source. Joran found him in the armory at dusk, the boy's face pale beneath his freckles. "Sir, I need to speak with you." Damon set aside the whetstone he'd been using to sharpen his blades. "What is it?" The boy swallowed hard. "It's about the blacksmith's apprentice. Rickard. I saw him last night, near the postern gate. He was talking to someone in the woods. Someone wearing Creighton colors." Damon went very still. "You're certain?" Joran nodded miserably. "I thought maybe I was wrong, so I followed him tonight. He went to the same place. There was a pouch. Coin, I think. Damon's blood ran cold. The blacksmith's apprentice had access to every corner of the castle. The armory, the stables, even Valeria's private chambers when repairs were needed. "Show me," he said. They found Rickard at the postern gate, just as the last light faded from the sky. The young man glanced furtively over his shoulder before slipping into the trees. Damon and Joran followed silently, their footsteps soundless on the damp earth. The meeting place was a small clearing not 50 paces from the castle walls. A hooded figure waited there, the Creighton insignia just visible on his cloak's clasp. "You're late," the stranger hissed. Rickard's voice was defensive. "I couldn't get away sooner. The lady has doubled the guards since the attack." "What of the king's visit?" 3 days as planned. "She means to." Damon stepped from the trees. Rickard whirled, his face draining of color. The Creighton man reached for his sword, but Damon was faster. His dagger found the man's throat before the blade could clear its sheath. As the body crumpled, Rickard fell to his knees. "Please, I had no choice. They have my sister." Damon hauled him up by his tunic. "How long?" Tears streaked the young man's face. "Since before you came. They threatened to kill her if I didn't tell them everything. The patrol routes, the guard rotations." His voice broke. "I didn't want to, but she's all I have." Joran made a small, pained noise behind them. Damon's grip tightened. "Where is she being held?" Rickard shook his head helplessly. "I don't know. They move her often. But I was to meet their captain tomorrow night. By the old mill. He brings news from their camp." Damon released him with a shove. "You'll take me there. And my sister? I'll get her back." Damon's voice was ice. "But if you warn them, if you so much as breathe wrong between now and then, I'll slit your throat myself." "Understood." Rickard nodded frantically. Damon turned to Joran. "Go to Lady Valeria. Tell her what we've learned. But no one else." "Not yet." The boy hesitated. "What are you going to do?" Damon's smile was all teeth. "What I do best." The night swallowed him as he melted back into the trees, the traitor's frightened breaths the only sound behind him. Tomorrow, he would walk into the viper's nest. And for the first time in years, he found himself looking forward to the hunt. The old mill stood rotting at the edge of the Dainhart lands, its broken water wheel creaking in the night wind like a dying man's breath. Damon crouched in the shadow of an oak, watching. Waiting. Rickard fidgeted beside him, the traitor's fingers plucking nervously at his tunic. He should have been here by now. Damon didn't answer. His eyes never left the tree line. The moon hung heavy and full above them, casting silver light across the overgrown path leading to the mill. Too bright for his liking. A man could be seen in this light. A twig snapped. Damon's hand went to his dagger as a figure emerged from the forest. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the easy confidence of a man who'd walked through blood and come out smiling on the other side. Damon knew his type. Had been his type. The captain. Rickard made to stand, but Damon caught his arm, nails biting into flesh. "Not yet." The captain paused at the mill's entrance, scanning the darkness. Damon held his breath. Then a whistle. Low and sharp. The call of a nightjar. Another figure stepped from the mill's ruined doorway. Smaller, slighter, their face hidden beneath a hood. Damon's pulse jumped. Something about the way they moved. "Where's the boy?" The captain's voice was rough as gravel. The hooded figure shrugged. "Late, like always." A woman's voice. Damon's eyes narrowed. The captain spat. "Useless whelp. If he's betrayed us." "He hasn't." Rickard tore free of Damon's grip and stumbled forward into the moonlight. "I'm here." Damon cursed silently. Too soon. But there was no helping it now. He melted deeper into the shadows, circling. The captain grabbed Rickard by the throat. "You were followed." "No. I swear it." The woman laughed, a cold, familiar sound that stopped Damon mid-step. "You always were a terrible liar, Rickard." Her hands rose, pushing back the hood. Damon's blood turned to ice. Lady Isolde. Valeria's aunt. The woman who had helped raise her after her mother's death. Who sat at her right hand during council meetings. Who kissed her cheek each night before bed. The pieces fell together with terrible clarity. "You." Rickard's voice broke. "But my sister is perfectly safe." Isolde's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Or she will be, so long as you continue to serve House Creighton." The captain released Rickard with a shove. "Enough chatter. The king comes in 2 days. What is the girl plan?" Isolde's lips curled. A pathetic display of loyalty. She means to beg for his intervention. And the wolf, still sniffing around where he doesn't belong. Isolde's gaze flickered toward the trees where Damon hid. His muscles coiled. But he'll be dealt with soon enough. The captain grunted. See that he is. Lord Creighton wants the Dainhart girl alive, but her pet killer's head on a pike. Damon had heard enough. He moved. The throwing knife took the captain in the throat before he could blink. The man staggered, choking on his own blood as Damon burst from the shadows. Isolde screamed. Rickard froze, eyes wide with terror. Damon didn't slow. He caught Isolde by the hair as she turned to run, yanking her back hard enough to make her spine creak. You! He pressed his blade to her throat. All this time, Isolde's breath came in panicked gasps. You don't understand. I understand betrayal. Damon's voice was death calm. I understand knives in the dark. What I don't understand is how a woman could sell out her own flesh and blood. Flesh and blood? Isolde laughed, high and wild. That bastard child is no kin of mine. Edric's whore of a wife foisted another man's get upon him, and I was expected to. Damon slammed her head against the mill wall. Enough. Rickard made a broken sound. My sister. Go. Damon didn't take his eyes off Isolde. The Eastern Guard post. Ask for Harlan. Tell him the wolf sent you. As Rickard fled, Isolde's eyes glittered with hate. You've doomed them all. Creighton's forces are already moving. By dawn, you'll be hanging from your own battlements. Damon tightened his grip, and Valeria will know exactly who to thank for it. The walk back to the castle was long. Isolde struggled at first, until Damon reminded her how easily a knife could slip. After that, she went quietly, but the silence sat heavy on Damon's shoulders. He'd seen the look in Valeria's eyes when she spoke of her aunt. The love, the trust, and tomorrow he would have to watch as he tore that away from her. Just another wound in a world full of them. The castle gates loomed ahead. Somewhere within, Valeria waited, unaware that the knife at her back had always been held by family. Damon's jaw tightened. Let her hate him for this, so long as she lived. The great hall smelled of burning wax and betrayal. Damon stood with his back to the cold stone wall, watching as Valeria paced before the hearth. The firelight painted shadows across her face, deepening the hollows beneath her eyes. She hadn't slept. Neither had he. Isolde knelt in the center of the room, her fine gown torn at the shoulder where Damon had dragged her through the postern gate. The gag in her mouth muffled her venom, but her eyes promised murder. You're certain? Valeria's voice was raw. Not a question. A plea. Damon nodded. Heard it from her own lips. The logs in the fireplace crackled, sending up a shower of sparks. Valeria stopped pacing. For a long moment, she simply stared at her aunt, the woman who had brushed her hair as a child, who had taught her the names of constellations on clear winter nights. Then she struck her across the face. The slap echoed through the hall. Isolde's head snapped to the side, a thin trickle of blood appearing at the corner of her mouth. You sold us. Valeria's hands trembled at her sides. For what? A title? Lands? Damon removed the gag. Isolde spat blood onto the rushes. For justice, she hissed. Your whore mother cuckolded my brother with some hedge knight, then died before she could be properly shamed. And he, soft-hearted fool, raised you as his own. Her lips peeled back from her teeth. You have no right to these lands. No right to his name. Valeria recoiled as if struck again. Damon saw the doubt flicker across her face, terrible, gnawing doubt, and something in his chest twisted. He stepped forward. She's lying. Isolde laughed. Am I? Ask Harlan, the old master-at-arms. He knew. Ask Father Dono. They all knew. Valeria's breath came too fast. Damon could see the foundations of her world crumbling beneath her, stone by terrible stone. He'd seen it happen to men before battle, that moment when they realized death was coming, and nothing would ever be the same again. The doors burst open. Joran stumbled in, his face ashen. My lady, the watchtowers, Creighton's forces. Damon was moving before the boy finished. He grabbed Valeria's arm, hauling her toward the side door. We need to go. Now. She resisted. The people will follow their lady. Damon's voice cut through her panic. But only if she lives. Isolde's laughter followed them into the passageway. Run, little bastard. See how far you get. Damon didn't look back. The eastern gate was chaos. Women clutched crying children to their chests as men scrambled to gather weapons, supplies, anything they could carry. The village beyond the walls was already burning, orange flames licking at the pre-dawn sky. Harlan, the grizzled old master-at-arms, met them at the gatehouse. The mountain pass, he gasped, pressing a blood-stained map into Valeria's hands. Take the people there. The caves will shelter you. Valeria gripped his arm. Come with us. Harlan's smile was sad. Someone needs to buy you time. His eyes flicked to Damon. Keep her safe, Wolf. Then he was gone, shouting orders to the handful of soldiers who had chosen to stay. Damon herded Valeria forward, through the press of bodies. The air smelled of smoke and terror. Somewhere beyond the walls, a war horn sounded, deep and mournful as a dying beast. Joran appeared at his elbow, dragging a limping Rickard behind him. The blacksmith's apprentice held a bundled cloak in his arms. Inside, a small face peeked out, wide-eyed with fear. His sister. The tunnels, Damon ordered. Go. They ran as the first boulders struck the castle walls. The ground trembled beneath their feet. Behind them, the world burned. Valeria stumbled. Damon caught her, his hands closing around her waist. For a heartbeat, they stood frozen, her breath warm against his throat. Then she pulled away, her face hardening into something fierce and terrible. I will come back for them. Damon knew that tone. Knew that look. He'd seen it in his own reflection, years ago, when he'd first picked up a blade and sworn never to be weak again. He nodded. We will. The mountain pass loomed ahead, dark and narrow. Somewhere in its depths, their people waited. Somewhere beyond, Creighton's army gathered. And Damon, the black wolf who had run from every fight that mattered, found himself standing his ground at last. Not for coin, not for pride, for her. The storm broke as they reached the caves, rain mixing with the ash on their faces. Valeria turned for one last look at her burning home, her fingers finding Damon's in the dark. He didn't let go. The caves smelled of damp earth and unwashed bodies. Children's whimpers echoed against the rough stone walls as the last of the villagers stumbled in from the storm. Damon stood at the entrance, watching the rain sheet across the valley below. The castle was a distant smear of fire against the black horizon. Valeria moved through the refugees like a ghost, pressing a hand to a shoulder here, murmuring reassurance there. The people reached for her as she passed, their fingers brushing her sleeves like she was some kind of saint. Damon saw how her jaw tightened each time, how her shoulders stiffened under their desperate hope. Joran appeared at his elbow, the boy's face streaked with soot. Harlan's not coming, is he? Damon didn't answer. The old soldier had stayed behind with a dozen others to hold the gate. Brave fools. Valeria joined them at the cave mouth, her dress torn and muddy. We need to take stock of supplies. Damon turned from the storm. Food. Enough for 3 days. For if we ration. Water. There's a spring at the back of the cavern. She hesitated. We lost most of the grain stores. Joran made a small, wounded noise. Valeria's hand found his shoulder. Damon studied the huddled masses. Old men with hunting bows, farmers' wives clutching kitchen knives, children wide-eyed with terror. Not an army. Barely even a militia. His fingers itched for his dagger. Creighton will send trackers. Valeria's chin lifted. Let him. The firelight caught in her hair, painting red highlights in the chestnut brown. Damon had seen noblewomen before, had killed a few. They usually wept or begged when death came knocking. This one just got angrier. He jerked his head toward a side tunnel. We need to talk. The passage narrowed to a thin crevice, the stone pressing close on either side. Damon checked for listening ears before speaking. Your aunt's story. Is it true? Valeria went very still. Does it matter? It matters if it gets you killed. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. If there's even a chance you're not Edric's blood heir. I am his daughter. Her eyes burned in the dim light. In every way that counts. Damon studied her face, the stubborn set of her jaw, the fire in her gaze. He'd known lords who would have sold their own mothers for half her courage. Then we need to act like it. She exhaled sharply. What are you suggesting? Creighton thinks he's won. That's when men get careless. Damon's thumb traced the hilt of his dagger. I know how he thinks, how his men operate. Understanding dawned in Valeria's eyes. You want to go back. I want to even the odds. For a long moment, she said nothing. The storm howled outside, wind screaming through the mountain passes. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible over the noise. Take Joran with you. Damon blinked. The boy's barely weaned. He knows these lands better than you, and he's quiet when it counts. She met his gaze. You taught him that. Something twisted in Damon's chest. He thought of Joran's panicked freeze during the ambush, the way his hands shook when he held a blade. The boy would get himself killed. He stays, Damon growled. Valeria's fingers closed around his wrist. Her skin was surprisingly warm. Then you do too. The challenge hung between them. Damon could have shaken her off, could have walked into the storm alone. He'd done it before. Instead, he found himself nodding. They returned to the main cavern to find Rickard tending the small fire, his sister curled asleep against his side. The blacksmith's apprentice looked up as they approached. "My lady," he swallowed hard. "About my betrayal. Was your sister returned to you?" Valeria asked. Rickard nodded. "Then we're square." She knelt beside the fire, accepting a bowl of thin broth from an old woman. "Rest tonight. Tomorrow we take back our home." The refugees murmured, some in fear, some in grim agreement. Damon watched as Valeria moved among them, her back straight despite the exhaustion in her eyes. Joran sidled up to him. "What's the plan, sir?" Damon stared into the flames. "First, we find Harlan's body." The boy paled. "And then we remind Creighton why they call me the Black Wolf." Outside, the storm raged on. But in the heart of the mountain, something darker stirred. Revenge, Damon knew, was a dish best served with steel. Rain lashed against the castle walls as Damon slipped through the postern gate, his boots sinking into the blood-soaked mud. The courtyard was a charnel house. Harlan's body hung from the watchtower, his armor stripped away, his white hair matted with gore. The old man had died hard. Damon's fingers tightened around his dagger. Joran gagged beside him, pressing a hand to his mouth. The boy shouldn't have come, but Valeria had been right. He knew the castle's hidden passages better than anyone. "Steady," Damon murmured. A torch flared in the distance. They pressed against the wall as 2 Creighton soldiers staggered past, drunk on victory and stolen wine. One paused to piss on the Dainhart banners trampled in the mud. "Think the wolf's out there?" the younger one slurred. His companion laughed. "If he is, he's running. Like all the rest." Damon waited until their footsteps faded before moving. The service tunnels were where Joran had promised, hidden behind a collapsed section of the eastern wall. The boy's hands shook as he worked the rusted latch. Inside, the air stank of damp stone and rats. "They'll have taken the Great Hall for their command," Joran whispered. "Lord Creighton likes his comforts." Damon nodded. "Show me." They moved like ghosts through the passages, the sound of laughter and clinking tankards growing louder. A hidden alcove overlooked the Great Hall, a spy hole meant for watching guests, now turned against the invaders. Creighton lounged in Valeria's chair, his boots propped on the carved oak table. A serving girl cowered as he grabbed her waist, his fingers digging into her flesh. "Cheer up, wench. Your precious lady isn't coming back." Damon's vision tunneled. He started forward. Joran caught his arm. "Wait." A side door opened. Isolde swept in, her gown immaculate, her hair coiled like a crown. "Enough revelry," she snapped. "The girl still lives." Creighton waved a dismissive hand. "Hiding in some peasant hovel. We'll root her out. You don't know Valeria." Isolde's voice turned brittle. "She'll come for her people. For her throne." A slow smile spread across Creighton's face. "Let her." He gestured to his captain. "Double the guards. And bring me the prisoners." Damon's blood ran cold. The soldiers dragged them in chains, old men and women who had stayed behind to tend the wounded. Master Brewer Tomas, his leg mangled. The weaver's blind daughter. A dozen others. Joran made a wounded sound. "That's my." Damon clamped a hand over the boy's mouth as the captain spoke. "Hang them at dawn," Creighton ordered, "where the road meets the forest. Let the crows feast while their precious lady watches." Isolde's lips thinned. "And draw her right to us." "Clever." Damon pulled Joran back into the darkness. The boy was shaking, tears cutting clean streaks through the dirt on his face. "We have to." "I know." Damon's voice was steel. "But we do it smart." They found Rickard's forge untouched. The invaders had no use for a blacksmith's tools. The fire was cold, but the heavy hammer still lay where it had fallen. Damon hefted it in his hands. "Can you make more of these?" Joran blinked. "Not swords. Too slow. Too obvious." Damon ran a thumb along the hammer's edge. "Every peasant has a mallet. Every kitchen a cleaver." Understanding dawned in the boy's eyes. "The people will fight. They'll want to." Damon set the hammer down with a quiet thud. "But first, we give them something worth fighting for." The castle bell tolled midnight as they slipped into the dungeons. The guards were drunk, their laughter echoing off the wet stone. Damon moved like shadow given form. 2 quick strikes. 2 bodies crumpling. The keys jangled as he pulled them free. Joran was already at the cells, his whisper frantic. "Father, we're here." The old man's face was a mask of bruises, but his eyes were clear. "You fool boy," he rasped. "You glorious fool." Damon worked the locks. The prisoners stumbled out, their chains clinking. Too many to hide. Too many to move quietly. A shout echoed from the stairwell. "Go!" Damon shoved Joran toward the escape tunnel. "Take them to the mill house." The boy hesitated. "But you?" "I'll buy time." Damon drew his daggers, the steel gleaming in the torchlight. "Tell Valeria, tell her to strike at dawn." Boots pounded on stone. The first soldier rounded the corner, his sword raised. Damon smiled. Somewhere above, an alarm bell began to ring. The mill house stank of blood and burning pitch. Damon leaned against the splintered doorframe, watching the eastern sky lighten through the broken roof beams. His left arm hung useless at his side, the arrow wound in his shoulder weeping slow crimson tears down his torn sleeve. Every breath tasted of iron and smoke. They'd come in waves through the night, Creighton's men, hunting the escaped prisoners. Damon had lost count after the fifth body fell. Joran crouched by the water barrel, his hands shaking as he wrung out a bloodied rag. The boy had fought like a demon once the killing started, his hammer finding its mark with brutal efficiency. He wasn't a boy anymore. "They're coming," Tomas whispered from his pallet. The old brewer's face was gray with pain, but his eyes were sharp. "Listen." The forest had gone silent. No birds. No wind. Only the distant creak of leather and steel. Damon pushed off the wall, biting back a groan. His knives were gone, lost somewhere in the dark of the tunnels, but the dead had left plenty of weapons behind. He selected a notched short sword, testing its weight. Joran stood, his hammer dangling from raw-knuckled fingers. "We can't hold them." "We don't have to." Damon spat blood onto the dirt floor. "Just long enough." The first arrow took Tomas through the throat. The old man made no sound, simply crumpled forward like a sack of grain. Joran cried out, reaching for him, but Damon yanked the boy back as 3 more shafts punched through the rotting wood where he'd stood. "Down!" The door exploded inward in a shower of splinters. Damon met the first soldier with his stolen blade, gutting the man before he'd fully crossed the threshold. The second came in low, his axe whistling toward Damon's knees. He pivoted, feeling the wind of its passage, and brought his elbow down on the man's spine. Something cracked. Joran's hammer took the third in the temple. They fought back to back as the mill house filled with Creighton's colors. Damon's world narrowed to the dance of steel and the hot spray of blood in his face. A dagger found his ribs. He barely felt it. Then horns. Not the deep bellow of Creighton's war calls, but something higher. Wilder. The soldiers hesitated. Through the broken walls, Damon saw them. Villagers streaming from the forest with scythes and wood axes, their faces twisted in rage. And at their head, riding a stolen warhorse with her hair flying like a banner, Valeria. She wore no armor, only a quilted gambeson stained with mud and blood. Her sword flashed as she cut down a fleeing sentry, her lips moving in a war cry lost beneath the chaos. Damon laughed, the sound bubbling wet in his ruined chest. Of course she'd come. The remaining soldiers broke, scrambling for the tree line. Joran made to follow, but Damon caught his arm. "Let them run." He coughed, tasting copper. "We have." The world tilted. Strong hands caught him as his knees gave out. Valeria's scent, steel and lavender and sweat, filled his nose as she lowered him against the millstone. Her fingers probed his wounds, coming away red. "Stubborn wolf," she murmured. Damon tried to grin. "Told you. I'd buy time." Her eyes glittered in the dawn light. "You bought more than that." The villagers were cheering now, their voices rising above the crackle of distant fires. Someone shouted Dainhart, and the cry was taken up, echoing through the trees like thunder. Joran appeared at Valeria's shoulder, his face alight. "The castle is ours." Valeria didn't look away from Damon. "Isolde's dead." Creighton fled like the coward he is. Damon exhaled through his teeth as she pressed a bandage to his side. "And you?" Her smile was a blade unsheathed. "I'm exactly where I belong." Beyond the broken walls, the sun crested the horizon, painting the battlefield in gold. The villagers were gathering the wounded, tending to the fallen. A child laughed somewhere, the sound incongruous amidst the wreckage. Damon's vision blurred. He felt Valeria's fingers tighten around his. "Stay with me," she ordered, as if he could be anywhere else. The Black Wolf had spent a lifetime running. From battles, from kings, from the ghosts of all the men he'd killed. But here, with her hand in his and the dawn breaking over a free land, here at last he was home. The crown could wait. For now, this was enough. The first light of morning painted the battlefield in shades of gold and crimson. Damon stood at the edge of the ruined mill house, watching as the last of Creighton's forces fled into the forest. His breath came in ragged gasps, each one sending fresh waves of pain through his battered body. The arrow still protruded from his shoulder, the shaft broken off in the fighting. He'd live. Probably. Valeria moved through the carnage like a storm given human form. Her sword hung loose in her grip, the blade darkened with blood. The villagers followed in her wake, their faces a mix of exhaustion and triumph. They looked at her not as a noblewoman now, but as something more, a leader forged in fire and blood. Joran limped up beside Damon, his left arm bound in a crude sling. "She did it," the boy murmured, coloring his voice. Damon grunted. "We did it." The boy shook his head. "You didn't see her in the forest. The way she rallied them." His voice trailed off as Valeria turned toward them, her gaze finding Damon's across the battlefield. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to that single look. Then she was striding toward them, her boots kicking up ash and bloodied earth. "You're supposed to be resting," she said when she reached them. Damon smirked. "You're supposed to be safe in the mountains." Her lips twitched, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. There was something haunted in her gaze now, something that hadn't been there before the battle. Damon recognized it well, the look of someone who had stared into the abyss and found it staring back. "The castle?" he asked quietly. Valeria's jaw tightened. "Ours? What's left of it?" Joran shifted uncomfortably. "And Lady Isolde. Dead." The word fell like a stone. She took poison rather than face judgment. Damon studied Valeria's face, seeing the grief warring with fury beneath her composed mask. He knew that pain, the special agony of betrayal by family. Before he could speak, a commotion rose from the road. The villagers parted as a group of riders approached, their banners bearing the king's falcon crest. At their head rode a man in silvered armor, his face lined with years and war. Valeria stiffened. "The king." Damon's hand drifted to the hilt of his borrowed sword. "You didn't mention inviting royalty." "I didn't." Her eyes narrowed. "But it seems we have an audience regardless." The king dismounted with the ease of a much younger man, his sharp gaze sweeping over the battlefield before settling on Valeria. "Lady Dainhart." His voice was deeper than Damon expected, rich with authority. "I see my intervention is belated." Valeria bowed her head. "Your Majesty honors us with your presence." The king waved a gauntlet hand. "Spare me the courtesies. I've ridden hard to see this mess settled." His eyes flicked to Damon. "And you must be the infamous Black Wolf." Damon met his gaze without flinching. "Must I?" A murmur ran through the king's retinue at the insolence, but the monarch only chuckled. "I see the stories didn't exaggerate." He turned back to Valeria. "Walk with me, my lady. We have much to discuss." As the king led Valeria away, Damon caught the way her fingers flexed at her sides, the only outward sign of her unease. Joran made to follow, but Damon caught his arm. "Let her handle this," he murmured. The boy frowned. "But what if? She's been playing this game longer than you think." Damon watched the two figures retreat toward the smoldering castle. "And she's better at it than anyone gives her credit for." The hours passed in a blur of activity. The wounded were tended, the dead gathered for burial. Damon moved through it all like a ghost, his body operating on instinct while his mind remained fixed on Valeria's meeting with the king. It was near dusk when she found him again, sitting alone on the broken steps of the castle's eastern tower. The setting sun painted her face in shades of orange and gold, highlighting the new lines of exhaustion and grief. "Well?" Damon asked. Valeria sank down beside him with a weary sigh. "Creighton is to be stripped of his titles, his lands divided among those who remained loyal." She hesitated. "And I am to be named Warden of the Eastern Marches." Damon raised an eyebrow. "That's generous." "It's politics." She picked at a loose thread on her sleeve. "The king needs someone strong to keep the peace. Someone the people will follow. And that's you." She turned to look at him then, her eyes searching his face. "It could be us." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Damon felt something tighten in his chest, something he'd thought long dead. "You know what I am," he said quietly. "I know who you are," she corrected. "The man who stood when others fled, who fought for people who were nothing to him." Damon looked away, out over the ruined lands that were now hers to rule. "The Black Wolf doesn't make a very good noble." Valeria's hand found his, her fingers intertwining with his calloused ones. "Good thing I'm not asking for the wolf." The last light of day faded around them, painting the world in twilight hues. Somewhere in the distance, a nightingale began to sing, its voice clear and strong in the gathering dark. Damon squeezed her hand. For the first time in longer than he could remember, the future stretched before him, bright with possibility. And for once, he wasn't running from it. The coronation hall smelled of beeswax and new banners. Damon shifted uncomfortably in his formal doublet, the embroidered wolf sigil itching at his collar. Around him, the nobility of Valtoria murmured as they waited. Lords who had once ignored Valeria now vying for her favor, ladies who had whispered about her parentage now curtsying deep. At the far end of the hall, the king rose from his throne. Silence fell. "Lady Valeria of House Dainhart," he intoned. "Step forward." She moved like a blade unsheathed, her crimson gown whispering against the stones, the silver circlet at her brow catching the light. Damon's breath caught. The girl who had faced down armies in a muddy gambeson was gone. Before him stood a queen in all but name. As the king placed the warden's chain around her neck, Valeria's gaze found Damon's in the crowd. A flicker of mischief crossed her face, the ghost of the woman who had once gagged a traitorous aunt with her own silk scarf. The hall erupted in applause. Epilogue, 1 year later. The first snow of winter dusted the rebuilt castle walls as Damon stood on the training grounds, watching Joran spar with the new recruits. The boy, now a man grown, moved with confidence, his hammer strokes precise. "Still teaching them to run?" Valeria's voice curled around him like smoke. She leaned against the fence, her warden's chain glinting beneath a fur-lined cloak. Damon smirked. "Only from fights they can't win." She snorted, breath fogging in the cold air. "Creighton's trial starts tomorrow." The name landed between them like a stone. The deposed lord had been found hiding in a brothel in the southern cities, his hair dyed black, his fine hands blistered from manual labor. Damon studied Valeria's profile, the tightness around her eyes. You could pardon him, and let him slink off to plot again? She shook her head. Justice must be seen. A shout drew their attention. Joran had knocked a recruit into the mud, and was offering a hand up, grinning. Beyond them, villagers moved freely through the castle gates, no fear in their steps anymore. Valeria's fingers brushed Damon's. "Was it worth it?" she asked quietly. "All the blood." He turned her hand over, tracing the calluses on her palm, sword calluses, earned through months of rebuilding what others had broken. "Ask me again in 50 years. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of baking bread from the kitchens and the distant laughter of children sledding on the eastern slopes. Somewhere in the forest, a wolf howled, its voice clear and unafraid in the winter air. What moment in this story resonated with you most? Was it Damon's reluctant loyalty, Valeria's transformation, or the smaller characters like Joran finding their courage? And if you could choose, would you rather fight beside the Black Wolf in his prime, or learn statecraft from Lady Valeria in her later years? Share your thoughts below.